You know that feeling when your husband says he's grabbing lunch with a brokerage client, but the only stock he's really trading is his wedding vows? Yeah, I'm Harper Bennett, a financial analyst who spends her days dissecting numbers and catching hidden red flags in balance sheets. Turns out, those same skills work wonders when your marriage ledger suddenly doesn't add up. My husband, Mason Bennett, a polished stockbroker, swore he was just rebranding his professional image to impress investors. But Armani suits and suspicious receipts from the Monarch Steakhouse every Thursday at 12:30 painted a very different portfolio. One that featured Layla Brooks, an interior designer who clearly preferred redesigning more than just living rooms. But here's where it gets interesting. I wasn't planning to storm in with tears or tantrums. I planned a shareholder meeting of my own, one where Layla would come face to face with her very own husband, Andrew, because if Mason wanted to run side trades in the shadows, I was going to take it all public in prime lunchtime hours. Before I tell you how it all unfolded, hit that subscribe button. Sometimes the most profitable investment isn't revenge, it's exposing the truth so loudly that even Wall Street goes quiet. When you work in finance long enough, you learn that numbers tell stories people don't want you to hear. I used to think my husband's long hours were just the cost of success on the trading floor. After all, being married to a stockbroker like Mason Bennett meant late nights tracking markets in Tokyo, last-minute calls with clients in London, and endless talk of futures and yields. I told myself the stress, the exhaustion, the way he often seemed half present at dinner. All of that was just Wall Street life spilling into our kitchen. But the truth wasn't in Tokyo or London. It was sitting in my living room every night, disguised as the man I thought I knew. The signs came quietly, disguised as upgrades. Mason had always been a khakis and button-down kind of guy. His idea of dressing up was throwing on a tie that didn't have last year's coffee stains. Then suddenly, he was showing up in slim-fit Italian suits and shoes polished like mirrors. "New clients," he explained when I asked. "I need to elevate my image." I remember laughing, calling him Gordon Gekko 2.0. But inside, I felt that ripple, the same feeling I get when a balance sheet doesn't reconcile. Something was off. Next came the lunches. For years, Mason barely left his desk at noon, wolfing down protein bars while watching tickers scroll across multiple monitors. Then, out of nowhere, he started having client lunches every Thursday. Always Thursday. Always 12:30. Always the Monarch Steakhouse, a place where the cheapest entree cost more than my weekly grocery run. He brushed it off as networking. "You can't land big accounts over stale office coffee," he said. I wanted to believe him, but belief is dangerous when the evidence starts piling up like bad debt. As a financial analyst, I pay the bills, manage the accounts, and monitor our household like it's a portfolio. One evening, while reconciling the credit card statement, I noticed repeated charges from the Monarch. Same time, same day, same pattern. Patterns are my specialty. I spend my career spotting them. And this one practically screamed in neon, "Not business." Still, I needed more than gut instinct. I pulled our joint phone bill. Dozens of calls to the same number, almost always during market breaks. Texts that lasted late into the night. I didn't recognize the number, but the consistency was damning. A quick reverse lookup gave me a name, Layla Brooks. I almost laughed. Of course she was an interior designer. There was something poetic about Mason trading one kind of portfolio for another. I found her on LinkedIn. Glossy headshot, boutique firm, profile littered with words like authentic connections and transformative spaces. Her photo radiated curated perfection. Blonde waves, that effortless glow, the kind of woman who schedules sunrise yoga before most people even hit snooze. And then there was Andrew Brooks, her husband. His Instagram told a different story. A man with an artist's eye, capturing sunsets, city streets, and his wife's smile like she was his favorite subject. I scrolled through their anniversary posts, his captions drenched with sincerity. The irony hit me like a freight train. Mason was sneaking away with a woman whose own husband still wrote poetry about her online. That realization crushed me more than Mason's betrayal itself. It wasn't just about me anymore. Someone else's life, someone else's trust, was being shredded alongside mine. Most wives in my position might have confronted their husband with tears and ultimatums. But that's not who I am. My job is to assess risk, build strategy, and execute when the timing is right. If Mason wanted to play games, I was about to run the most important campaign of my life. The hardship wasn't just emotional, it was the silence. Pretending everything was fine while he kissed my forehead in the morning, while he placed gilt roses in a vase like they could balance the books of our marriage. I learned to smile at dinner parties, to nod at his market stories, all the while cataloging evidence in my head. Every flower bouquet was an unpaid debt. Every just because gift was another line item in my growing case file. Some nights, I lay awake rehearsing possibilities. Divorce court battles, public confrontations, even quiet resignation. But none of them felt right. Then one Thursday, sitting in my car across from the Monarch, watching Mason's silver BMW slide into his usual discreet spot, the plan hit me with such clarity, it felt like fate. I wouldn't just expose him. I would collapse the entire false structure. If secrets were the currency of his affair, I would crash the market. And to do that, I needed a partner, someone just as betrayed as me. That someone was Andrew. 8 months after that Thursday showdown at the Monarch, I sat in a sunlit home office that finally felt like mine. Not ours. Mine. On the wall hung a framed black and white photograph. A woman stepping through a glass door, sunlight crowning her silhouette. The subject was me. The photographer? Andrew Brooks. It's funny. I used to measure success in bonuses, metrics, and the kind of financial models that made executives nod approvingly. But sitting there with that photo watching over me, success looked different. It wasn't the size of my portfolio. It was the absence of lies in my daily balance sheet. After the confrontation, Mason moved out within 3 days. The affair had burned in public, and he couldn't stand the fallout. Judges, I learned, don't look kindly on stockbrokers who wine and dine someone else's wife on joint credit cards. The divorce proceedings tilted in my favor, and for once, the scales of justice balanced. Mason packed his suits and his Rolex knockoffs and left Austin for Chicago, chasing a fresh market. I didn't stop him. Markets correct themselves eventually. Meanwhile, Andrew called me 2 weeks after our restaurant ambush. Not to argue, not to scold, but to thank me. He said I had handed him truth when he'd been living in fiction. We met for coffee, first just to swap survival strategies. Divorce law is messy, and navigating it with someone who understood every emotional curve was a relief. Then came more coffees, then lunches, and finally a collaboration. See, Andrew's photography was more than art. It was raw, human storytelling. He'd spent years being told by Layla that his work was too dreamy to sell. But when I saw his portfolio, I didn't see dreaminess. I saw campaigns waiting to happen. I hired him on a project for my firm, a rebrand that needed visual power. His images didn't just fit, they transformed the campaign. Client retention spiked 30%, and suddenly, Andrew wasn't just the guy with a camera. He was the visual heartbeat of our work. Professional partnership slowly blurred into personal closeness. It wasn't some rebound whirlwind. We weren't desperate to fill holes. We were two people learning to breathe again, side by side. Watching him rebuild his confidence was like watching the market rebound after a brutal crash. Gradual, steady, but undeniable. And he did the same for me. He reminded me I wasn't just someone's betrayed wife. I was Harper, a woman with power, with vision, with value beyond the numbers I'd spent years crunching. Now, we live in a house with a photography studio for him and an office for me. We host dinner parties where laughter isn't a performance, but the background music. I still analyze numbers for a living, but at home, I measure a different kind of return. Joy, respect, honesty. Success today doesn't look like Mason's Armani suits or Layla's curated Instagram. It looks like Andrew's camera clicking while I laugh mid-sentence. It looks like a Sunday afternoon when the only investment decision is whether to open a bottle of wine or brew another pot of coffee. It looks like freedom. And every so often, when doubt creeps in, I glance at that photo of me walking through the door. Andrew titled it Exit Strategy. For me, it's more like entry point, because leaving Mason wasn't the end of a trade. It was the opening bell of a new market, one where authenticity isn't just a buzzword, it's the currency. Betrayal doesn't always end the day you expose it. Sometimes it circles back, like a stock you thought you'd sold, only to find it creeping into your portfolio again. That was Mason for me. A bad investment that kept trying to claw its way back onto my balance sheet. It started with an email that popped into my inbox late on a Friday evening. The subject line read, "Can we talk? Privately." The irony almost made me laugh. Mason had demolished the very concept of private the moment he slid into a corner booth at the Monarch with another man's wife. Yet now, suddenly, he wanted discretion. Against my better judgment, I agreed to a video call, but I wasn't stupid. My attorney was patched in silently, recording everything. When the screen lit up, Mason appeared against a blank white wall in a drab rental. Gone was the sharp-dressed broker in tailored suits. What stared back was a man dulled by regret and poorly ironed shirts. "Harper," he began, his voice heavy. "I know I made mistakes, but what you did, in public, it was cruel." I studied him the way I study a volatile chart. "Cruel?" I repeated, calm but cutting. "Cruel is spending our joint account on steak and wine while I paid the mortgage. Cruel is lying to my face and calling it networking." What I did wasn't cruelty, Mason. It was disclosure. And disclosure is always public. He winced, like my words had struck deeper than any scream ever could. He muttered about Layla leaving town, about starting over, about maybe giving us another chance. I almost felt a flicker of pity, but pity doesn't rewrite ledgers. It doesn't cancel debt. "Mason," I said, steady, "our only business now is you signing the final settlement papers. That's the only correction left for you to make." He sighed, rubbed his forehead, and disconnected. For a moment, The screen went dark, and I sat in silence, marveling at how little power his words held over me now. But Mason wasn't the only ghost clawing at the edges of my new life. One evening, my phone buzzed with a message from a secondary Instagram account. The sender was Layla.
You don't know my whole story. I considered ignoring it. Andrew, sitting beside me, placed a steady hand on mine. Read it, he said softly. Not to forgive her, but to close the file.
So I opened it. Layla's words tumbled out like a confession. She wrote of a chaotic childhood, of feeling invisible, of craving admiration. She described Mason as a temporary escape, someone who made her feel seen when her own marriage felt suffocating. She ended with, "I'm sorry. Truly, I know I hurt you." I stared at the screen, waiting for some kind of emotional shift. Anger? Relief? Closure? Instead, I felt nothing. Layla wasn't just a villain in my story. She was a flawed, desperate human being, but knowing that didn't erase the damage. It didn't rebuild what she had helped burn. I typed back one short reply. I don't need your apology to live my life. What I need are boundaries. Please respect them. She never wrote again. Life carried on. A month later, Andrew and I were invited to speak at a Dallas creative conference. The topic, turning personal crises into authentic narratives. I told our story, not with melodrama, but with measured precision. The audience listened intently. During the Q&A, a woman stood up. "Why did you choose to expose them in public?" she asked. I took a deep breath. "Because secrecy is the fuel of betrayal," I explained. "Remove the secrecy, and the fire dies." My goal wasn't to humiliate. It was to end the lie in the very place it lived. When the session ended, a young woman approached me in tears. She whispered, "Thank you. I just ended my own Thursday lunches." In her eyes, I saw my past self, hurt, but finally reclaiming her agency. That night, standing on a balcony overlooking the Dallas skyline, Andrew asked me the question that still lingered in his mind. "Do you ever worry that we might end up like them?" I thought about it, the city lights flickering below us like stock tickers. "Of course I worry," I admitted. "But the difference is, we talk when the cracks are small. We don't wait until the whole building collapses." He nodded, relief flickering across his face. We stood there, side by side, two people stitched together by betrayal, but held strong by honesty. Betrayers may return. Ghosts may knock. But when you've learned to live with truth as your currency, you don't fear them anymore. You simply close the file, balance the account, and move forward. I call this chapter the initial test. Though it felt less like an exam and more like building a case file against the man who vowed to be my partner. It started, as most betrayals do, with tiny discrepancies. Mason, my stockbroker husband, was always a creature of habit. Desk lunches, stale protein bars, endless screens filled with numbers. Then came the sudden shift. Thursday lunches at the Monarch Steakhouse, always at 12:30. At first, I convinced myself it was harmless. The market is stressful, clients are demanding, and networking often happens over expensive steaks. But in finance, patterns matter. One transaction might be noise, but repetition forms a signal. And the signal here was screaming. I began to document. Thursday, 12:30, $140 charge. Next Thursday, another. Then again, a clean, predictable pattern. I knew if I graphed it, the line would be perfect, the kind of trend any analyst would kill for, except this trend wasn't profit. It was evidence. The next step was the phone bill. Joint accounts have their perks, and this one became my flashlight in the dark. Dozens of calls to a single number. Texts sprinkled throughout the day. Conversations lasting 45 minutes during trading lulls. I didn't recognize the number, but the regularity was damning. A quick reverse lookup gave me a name. Layla Brooks. I stared at the screen, repeating the name out loud. Layla. Even her name felt curated, like something out of a lifestyle magazine. A LinkedIn search confirmed my hunch. She was an interior designer with her own boutique firm. Her headshot was flawless. Blonde waves, tasteful jewelry, the smile of someone who knows they belong in the spotlight. Her tagline read, "Creating authentic spaces for authentic living." The irony nearly knocked me over. I dug deeper. Her Instagram was a shrine to aesthetic perfection. Acai bowls, yoga at sunrise, sparkling countertops. Her captions were sprinkled with lines about living your best life and choosing joy. I clicked on one particular photo of her sipping wine, the glass stem glinting against a glossy black table. My stomach dropped. I recognized the table. The monarch's tables gleamed exactly like that. But the final blow came not from Layla, but from her husband. Scrolling her feed, I noticed comments from an account tagged Andrew Brooks. His words were tender, full of admiration. "Proud of you, babe. Love this shot of you." Another masterpiece. His page revealed him to be a photographer and brand consultant, with a portfolio of moody landscapes and soulful portraits. His posts about Layla were filled with love, sincerity, devotion. He was the collateral damage Mason never considered. I couldn't stop looking at his work, wondering how a woman could betray a man who so clearly adored her. And then I thought of myself. Hadn't I been the same? Supportive, patient, carrying the weight while Mason chased trades and commissions? And yet, both of us had been discarded, like old portfolios no longer yielding returns. Following them in person was my lowest point, but I needed certainty. The first Thursday, I sat at the bar, feigning interest in the wine list. Mason arrived first, crisp suit, the swagger of a man who thought he was untouchable. He adjusted his cufflinks, checked his phone, and then Layla appeared, brushing his shoulder in greeting. They leaned close, their laughter spilling across the room like cheap champagne. I wrote down the time. The second Thursday, I returned. This time, I didn't just watch. I studied. Their routine was rehearsed. Mason ordered a whiskey neat. Layla ordered sparkling water. They held eye contact too long, smiled too easily, touched hands across the table like teenagers. I captured it all in my memory, another data point confirming the trend. That night, Mason came home with roses. He kissed my forehead, whispered, "Long day." I placed the flowers in a vase, smiling tightly, but inside, I was already planning. As a financial analyst, I knew that exposure matters. Secrets thrive in silence. To stop the game, I needed light. That meant bringing Andrew into the picture. He deserved the truth as much as I did. I drafted the email carefully. Professional, polished. I'm leading a new campaign that needs strong visuals. Your portfolio is impressive. Could we meet Thursday, 12:30, the Monarch? It looked like a business inquiry, nothing more. 2 hours later, his reply arrived. Warm, enthusiastic, professional. Thank you for considering me. The Monarch sounds great. Looking forward to it. He had no idea what was waiting for him. The morning of the meeting, I dressed not like a scorned wife, but like a strategist heading into battle. Navy blazer, crisp blouse, heels that clicked with authority. This wasn't about confrontation. It was about execution. At 12:28, Andrew walked in. Taller than I expected, with a sincerity in his eyes that twisted the knife in my heart. He shook my hand firmly. "Thank you for meeting me, Miss Bennett." "Please, call me Harper," I said, smiling faintly. Then 12:30 struck. Mason entered, the familiar swagger intact. He scanned the room, oblivious to me, and settled into the corner booth. A minute later, Layla swept in, her cream dress catching the light. They embraced, too close, too familiar. Andrew's eyes widened. "That's my wife." He raised his hand to wave, but I placed mine gently on his arm. "Andrew, before you do that, I need to tell you something. The man she's with is my husband." Silence. His face went pale. Confusion flashed to recognition, then to devastation. "You're saying?" "Yes," I said softly. "Every Thursday. This table. For weeks." We stood, together, step by step across the restaurant floor. Mason saw me first, and the color drained from his face. Layla turned, her eyes locking on Andrew, and the perfect facade shattered. Sliding into their booth uninvited. I smiled like a host at a dinner party. "Well, isn't this a coincidence? Mason, meet Andrew Brooks. Andrew, this is my husband." The restaurant froze. Conversations hushed. Forks stopped midair. Layla's lips parted, but no words came. Mason stammered. "It's not what it looks like." "Oh, Mason," I cut in sweetly. "It's exactly what it looks like, except now, you don't get to hide it." Andrew remained standing, towering over them, his silence louder than any accusation. The four of us sat in a tableau, betrayal laid bare under chandelier light. The truth had no place left to hide, and for the first time in weeks, I felt steady. Evidence, to me, has always been more reliable than feelings. As a financial analyst, I was trained to separate intuition from confirmation, suspicion from proof. Numbers don't lie. People do. And when Mason's betrayal moved from shadows into suspicion, I knew the only way forward was to build a record so undeniable that even he couldn't worm his way around it. At first, I thought the confrontation at the Monarch would be enough. Exposing him in public, shattering Layla's carefully crafted facade, watching Andrew's heartbreak turn into clarity. Surely that would be the end. But endings in life are rarely neat. Confrontation is emotional. Courtrooms are clinical. And in divorce proceedings, emotions carry no weight unless they're tied to evidence. So, I built my case the way I would build a quarterly risk report. Folder by folder, document by document, until the story of Mason's betrayal was no longer just a feeling in my gut, but a portfolio of facts. The first folder was the timeline. I charted Mason's client lunches down to the date and time, Thursdays, 12:30 p.m., repeating like clockwork. I cross-checked with his calendar invites, noting every fabricated meeting. On one Thursday, he told me he was showing a property to a high-net-worth investor. My records showed a $160 charge at the Monarch, time-stamped precisely at 12:48. I printed the evidence and highlighted the discrepancy. A pattern emerged. Deception disguised as professionalism. The second folder was receipts. Our shared credit card statements read like a confession. The Monarch, the Monarch, the Monarch. Always on Thursdays. Occasionally a hotel bar. Once a boutique floral shop. Every charge became a red mark on the marriage ledger. I highlighted them with the same focus I once used to flag fraudulent accounts.
Mason had no idea that his supposed networking expenses were building a case stronger than any argument I could ever make. The third folder was phone records. Our carrier's billing history told the story in neon lights. Dozens of calls to Layla's number. Long ones during market lulls, short bursts of texts in the evenings. Some calls lasted nearly an hour, far too long for client chit-chat. I printed the log and highlighted every exchange. The stack grew thicker until it resembled a novel, one written in timestamps and durations instead of prose. The fourth folder was visuals. Screenshots of Layla's Instagram stories showing her wine glass at the Monarch. A glimpse of the restaurant's black lacquer table beneath her manicured hand. Captions about authentic connections posted at suspiciously convenient times. Even a story tagged late client meeting that perfectly overlapped with Mason's so-called investor dinner. She had unwittingly documented her own betrayal, and I archived every post before she could delete them. But evidence wasn't just digital. I went analog. I called the Monarch and posed as a potential client hosting a business lunch. "Do you have private booths?" I asked innocently. The hostess replied, "Of course, we have a corner booth that's often reserved by one of our regulars. Every Thursday, actually." She didn't give names, but she didn't have to. That corner booth was Mason and Layla's sanctuary, and now even the staff had noticed their routine. I didn't stop there. I gathered flowers Mason had bought me, those gilt bouquets he brought home after long work days. Each one had a receipt tucked into the bag. I slid those receipts into plastic sleeves. Every petal, every stem became evidence of an affair disguised as romance. Andrew helped too. He shared Layla's emails, carefully worded excuses about late consultations and urgent new clients. Her lies matched Mason's absences almost to the minute. We sat at my kitchen table one night, comparing notes like co-authors of the same tragic novel. Every time a date and time aligned, Andrew would sigh, and I would circle the proof. Betrayal, documented. When I finally bound everything into a single portfolio, it looked less like the story of a marriage and more like a financial audit. Clean, precise, undeniable. My lawyer flipped through it, page by page. "Harper," he said, "I rarely see clients this prepared. This isn't evidence." "This is a case study." The power of that binder wasn't just in court, it was psychological. Mason prided himself on control. He was the broker, the one who managed risks, the one who spun stories about clients and markets. But I had outplayed him. Every lie he told me was cross-referenced and disproven. Every bouquet, every steakhouse bill, every text was logged and stored. He had nothing left to argue. During mediation, his lawyer attempted spin. "There is no direct proof of a physical relationship," he said smoothly, trying to claw at technicalities. Without a word, my attorney slid the binder across the table, page after page of receipts, records, screenshots. Mason's face fell with each turn. The lawyer stuttered, then fell silent. The facts spoke louder than any protest. The judge didn't care about Mason's tears or Layla's excuses. Judges don't weigh heartbreak. They weigh evidence. And my evidence was clear. Mason had diverted marital funds into his double life. That shifted property division in my favor. It secured my financial stability. It tilted the balance of power away from him, forever. But beyond the courtroom, the evidence gave me something else. Peace. For months, I had lived in doubt, second-guessing myself, wondering if my suspicions were paranoia.
The binder silenced all of that. There was no paranoia, no guessing, only facts. Some nights, I sat in my office and flipped through the binder, not to relive the pain, but to marvel at the clarity. Betrayal thrives in darkness. Evidence drags it into the light. And once in the light, it loses its power to haunt you. I didn't keep the binder out of spite. I kept it as a reminder that my instincts had been right, that my skills as an analyst had saved me from drowning in lies. Mason may have thought secrecy was his ally, but in the end, it was his undoing. Every rose bouquet, every just because dinner, every whispered excuse was there, immortalized in ink and paper. My marriage hadn't collapsed because of one mistake. It collapsed because of patterns, and patterns are impossible to hide from an analyst trained to see them. Gathering evidence wasn't glamorous. It wasn't loud, but it was liberation. The numbers had told me the story Mason refused to admit. And once I held that story in my hands, bound and undeniable, I no longer feared the future. Because evidence doesn't just end lies, it rebuilds truth. Revenge was the word people kept throwing at me. So, what's your plan for revenge? How will you make Mason pay? Are you going to destroy Layla's career? It was as if everyone expected me to turn into some soap opera heroine, standing on a balcony with a glass of wine, plotting fiery vengeance. But that's not how I think. I'm a financial analyst. I don't gamble. I don't bet on drama. I calculate risks, weigh returns, and plan for stability. Retaliation for me wasn't about screaming in Mason's face or plastering Layla's mistakes across the internet. My retaliation would be quieter, sharper, and far more permanent. The first step was reframing my life as if it were a failing portfolio. I asked myself, what assets do I keep? What liabilities do I cut? Where do I invest next? Mason was a liability. Layla was an irrelevant distraction. What I had left was myself, my skills, and, surprisingly, Andrew, another person who had been undervalued in his own marriage. So I invested. I invested in rebuilding my career, starting with my professional brand. For years, I had been introduced as Mason's wife. At conferences, cocktail hours, and networking events, my identity was linked to his. The irony was that I had always been the one managing our household finances, balancing the books, spotting patterns that Mason missed. Now I stepped fully into my own spotlight. I accepted speaking engagements, began writing articles on financial transparency, and even led a workshop on detecting hidden risks, a title that carried more personal irony than my audience realized. The more I spoke, the more visible I became. People stopped asking about Mason. They started asking for me. Invitations poured in, not because of my name, but because of my expertise. Each time I stood on stage and delivered a presentation, I felt another layer of Mason's shadow peel away. My retaliation wasn't humiliating him. It was proving that I didn't need him to shine. The second step was collaboration. Andrew and I had been supporting each other emotionally, but soon we realized that our professional skills complemented each other perfectly. He was a gifted photographer and brand consultant, his images dripping with story and emotion. My world was numbers, clarity, and messaging. Together, we saw potential. We launched Visual Lab, a small studio that combined his art with my strategy. At first, it was just a handful of clients, startups wanting strong branding, small businesses needing campaigns that didn't just look good, but also worked financially.
But word spread quickly. Andrew's photos gave campaigns soul. My analysis gave them structure. Within 6 months, we had tripled our client list. For both of us, it was proof that what our former spouses had belittled in us was actually our greatest strength. The third step was setting boundaries. Retaliation doesn't work if you're still obsessed with the people who hurt you. I didn't stalk Mason's social media. I didn't Google Layla's name late at night. They were noise, and I chose silence. Mason tried to call me several times, first with apologies, then with accusations. "You humiliated me," one voicemail said. I saved it, not because I cared, but because sometimes I needed the reminder of why I left. I never called him back. Silence was part of my retaliation. It told him, "You no longer exist in my market. You've been written off as a loss." One evening, while Andrew and I were drafting a proposal for a new client, he looked at me thoughtfully. "Do you ever think about crushing them? Like really destroying their reputations?" I paused. I pictured Mason, alone in his Chicago apartment, probably eating takeout on credit he couldn't really afford. I pictured Layla, trying to curate happiness on Instagram, but failing to hide the cracks. Then I shook my head. No, crushing them keeps me tethered to them. The best retaliation isn't making them miserable, it's making myself untouchable. Andrew nodded slowly, relief in his eyes. We both knew what it meant to be consumed by bitterness. We'd seen it in others, in colleagues who never moved past betrayal. We weren't going to be those people. Retaliation for me was also personal. I started running again, something Mason had mocked as a waste of time. I joined a book club. I redecorated the house, not with curated perfection, but with authenticity. Warm colors, cozy furniture, walls filled with art from Andrew's studio, and prints I chose because they made me smile. Every detail was a declaration. This is my space now. By the time friends came over for our first dinner party, the difference was obvious. The room buzzed with laughter. People leaned back in chairs, mid-story, mid-laughter. No one walked on eggshells. No one worried about appearances. Andrew captured candid photos, and I realized this was my true retaliation. Building a home where truth was the only guest of honor. The old me might have posted carefully curated updates online to show Mason what he was missing. The new me didn't need to. My life wasn't a performance. It was real, grounded, and mine. Retaliation was not a single dramatic act. It was a long game, a portfolio built on patience, strategy, and steady growth. Mason and Layla had invested in secrecy and lies. I invested in transparency and authenticity, and the return on that investment was priceless. In the end, my retaliation was simple. I didn't burn their world down. I built my own. And in the quiet strength of that choice, I found a power Mason could never touch. If my marriage had been a stage play, then the Monarch Steakhouse was its final act. The room was perfectly set, polished tables gleaming under chandeliers, business people murmuring over overpriced lunches, waiters gliding between booths with plates of steak and scallops. None of them knew they were about to witness something far more compelling than their quarterly projections. When Andrew and I stood and began walking toward Mason and Layla's booth, it felt like moving through thick water. Every step carried weight. Mason noticed me first. His confident smirk collapsed into panic, his eyes widening as though he'd been caught standing naked in the middle of Wall Street. Layla was mid-sentence, laughing at something Mason had said, her manicured hand resting lightly on his. When she followed his gaze and saw Andrew beside me, the air shifted. Her smile froze. For the first time, the woman who curated perfection on social media looked utterly undone. I slid into the booth without invitation, forcing Mason and Layla to scoot awkwardly. Andrew remained standing, his height and silence giving him a quiet dominance. I smiled, the kind of smile honed in boardrooms where every word is calculated. "Well," I said, "isn't this a coincidence? Mason, you've never introduced me to your client. And Layla, I believe you already know your husband." The restaurant hushed. Forks paused midair. Even the clinking of glasses seemed to vanish. Mason stammered, "Harper, this isn't—" "Oh, Mason," I cut him off. "Don't embarrass yourself further. It's exactly what it looks like. Only now, you don't get to hide." Layla's voice shook. "Andrew, please, let me explain." Andrew's eyes were locked on her. His voice, steady and low, carried farther than hers. "Explain what? That every Thursday at 12:30, while I thought you were designing bedrooms, you were sharing one emotionally with him?" Her mouth opened, closed. No words came. Mason tried again, his desperation rising. "We were just networking, talking business?" I leaned back in the booth, folding my arms. "Business? Holding hands across the table? Trading stolen glances? Is this what client retention looks like now?" A few tables away, someone chuckled. The sound cut through Mason like a blade. His face flushed crimson. The silence that followed was excruciating for them, but liberating for me. This was the point, to strip secrecy from their affair. Without secrecy, it wasn't glamorous. It wasn't thrilling. It was pathetic. Just two adults, exposed for what they truly were. Andrew finally spoke again. "Layla, I believed every word you said about late projects and demanding clients. I believed because trust was the foundation of our marriage. But I see now trust was the stage. And you used it to perform." She whispered, "I'm sorry." The words fell flat, meaningless against the weight of betrayal. I stood, smoothing my blazer. "I think we're finished here. Enjoy your lunch, Mason. I hope it was worth the cost." Andrew remained still a moment longer, his gaze steady on Layla. Then he turned, following me out. Together, we walked across the restaurant, a strange mixture of grief and relief in every step. Behind us, whispers spread like wildfire. The show was over, but its echoes would last. The public climax wasn't about theatrics. It was about transparency. In that moment, in front of strangers, their lies collapsed. And as humiliating as it was for them, it was liberating for me. Sometimes justice doesn't wear robes or sit in a courtroom. Sometimes justice is simply four people at a table, and the truth too loud to ignore. The fallout came quickly, like a market crash after months of ignored warning signs. 3 days after the public confrontation at the Monarch, Mason packed his suits into garment bags and left. No long goodbyes, no drawn-out explanations. Just the hollow slam of the door and the knowledge that whatever had remained of our marriage had collapsed completely. He moved to Chicago within weeks, chasing a fresh market and a new start. I heard through colleagues that his reputation in Austin had soured. Clients whispered, colleagues smirked, and soon Mason became the story people told as a cautionary tale. The slick stockbroker who lost everything because he thought he could hedge betrayal like a risky trade. Layla disappeared too. One day, her Instagram was filled with yoga poses and smoothie bowls. The next, it was gone. deactivated like she had tried to erase herself from the city's memory. Word drifted back that she'd taken a position in Portland, claiming it was a creative opportunity. I didn't care enough to check. Andrew filed for divorce swiftly. His evidence was undeniable, and like me, he didn't waste time with drama. Layla didn't contest. Maybe shame weighed heavier than assets. For me, the consequences were oddly quiet. Courtrooms are rarely dramatic. Judges prefer facts, and my binder of receipts and timelines delivered them with brutal clarity. Mason's misuse of marital funds tilted the scales in my favor. Property division leaned toward me. Financial support secured my stability. Justice, when reduced to numbers, was oddly comforting. The house became mine. I redecorated, not with Layla's curated perfection, but with warmth and authenticity. Andrew helped transform a spare room into a photography studio, while I turned another into my office. Our work together at Visual Lab grew steadily. Clients trusted us, not just for our skills, but for the resilience our story carried. Concrete consequences weren't fireworks. They weren't shouted arguments or shattered plates. They were the quiet corrections of a ledger finally balanced. Mason lost his home, his wife, his credibility. Layla lost her husband and her carefully constructed image. And Andrew and I gained something neither of them could touch. Clarity, freedom, and a foundation to build on. Betrayal had taken much from me, but in the end, it gave me something too. The chance to rebuild with honesty as my only currency. Months later, on the eve of our first gallery showcase, I walked through the quiet hall where Andrew's photographs lined the walls. One image stopped me, caught mid-step, leaving a glass door with sunlight blazing behind me. He'd titled it Exit Strategy. I smiled. For me, it wasn't just about leaving Mason. It was about entering a life where honesty could breathe. Mason tried calling once more, his voicemail full of self-pity. I didn't delete it. Sometimes I play it when I need a reminder of how far I've come. Not to feel bitterness, but to laugh at the absurdity of a man who thought betrayal could be justified. This isn't his story anymore. It isn't even Layla's. It's mine. And mine ends not with revenge, but with renewal. Betrayal didn't bankrupt me. It set me free to invest in myself, to partner with someone who sees me clearly, and to design a future built on trust. If you've lived through your own Thursday at 12:30, remember, the market of lies will always crash. What remains is your chance to build something real. Before you go, subscribe to this channel. The next story might just be yours.